Hello everyone, today we are going to talk about modifiers, and specifically we're going to talk about two types of modifiers, misplaced modifiers and dangling modifiers. Now to get started, a modifier is an adjective, adverb, adjectival phrase, or adverbial phrase that further describes or modifies a noun or verb in a sentence. Now the reason we call them modifiers is because they are descriptions that modify the way we think about a noun or a verb. That being said, the easiest way to think of them is simply a description. So we're going to call them modifiers today, but you can replace that word with the word description and you'll be just fine. Now in our example, you can see the sentence says, "We anxiously watched the weather report for information about the hurricane churning in the Atlantic Ocean." Now in this sentence, the underlined portion, churning in the Atlantic Ocean, is our modifier. It is describing the hurricane. Now, because it's giving more information about the hurricane, because it's telling us what the hurricane is doing, that makes it a modifier. But it leads to a tricky situation with modifiers. Because as you can see here, this description is more than one word. It's an entire phrase. And that points out a problem that people often run into when they try to identify modifiers. First off, modifiers come in all shapes and sizes. They can describe nouns, they can describe verbs, they can be one word, they can be multiple words. And because of that, because they are so diverse, it makes them hard to find in a sentence. That being said, the easiest way to identify a modifier is simply to look for a description. And if you see a description, well, then you have also seen a modifier. Now, the rule with modifiers is that modifiers must be immediately next to whatever they describe or modify in a sentence. So when we are using a modifier, it needs to go right next to whatever is being described. Here's an example of that. The meeting during lunch was pointless. Now, the meeting is our noun phrase, and that's what's being described. But during lunch is the description. It's the modifier. It tells us when the meeting occurred. And you'll notice that those two phrases, the meeting and during lunch, both of those are immediately next to each other in the sentence. There's nothing between them. And for that reason, this sentence is written correctly, that modifier is used correctly. However, sometimes people make mistakes with modifiers, and one of those mistakes that people make is misplacing them. So a misplaced modifier is a type of mistake that people make when they use modifiers in their writing. Now, a misplaced modifier is a modifier that is not placed immediately next to whatever it is describing or modifying. Our example is at the bottom. Raymond, unfortunately stained with yellow mustard, wore his one collared shirt to the job interview. Now our modifier is unfortunately stained with yellow mustard. And that should describe the collared shirt. The collared shirt is the thing that is stained. But because of where it's placed in the sentence, because it's right next to Raymond, this modifier now implies that Raymond himself is unfortunately stained with yellow mustard, which is not what we want, right? We want the shirt to be stained with yellow mustard. That's what we're trying to describe. And so this is the problem that people run into. They put the modifier in the wrong place. They misplace the modifier. So again, to sum up here, a misplaced modifier is simply a modifier that is not placed directly next to whatever it is describing. Here are two more examples. The incorrect version of the sentence that we just looked at is Raymond, unfortunately stained with yellow mustard, wore his one colored shirt to the job interview. But now, once we move the modifier to the thing that is being modified, we come with the correct example here. Raymond wore his one collared shirt, which was unfortunately stained with yellow mustard, to the job interview. And so here what you have seen is how to correct a misplaced modifier. All you need to do is identify the modifier, figure out what it is modifying, and then put those two things directly together. Like we just talked about on the previous slide, the word that is being, or the phrase that is being described here is one colored shirt. And so all we have to do to fix this is move our modifier right next to one colored shirt, and then we are good to go. Now, the next type of mistake that people make with modifiers is a dangling modifier. And a dangling modifier is a type of modifier that does not directly refer to or modify a noun or verb in the sentence. And so then it gets confusing because the thing that is being modified isn't in the sentence, which therefore makes it impossible for the modifier to be right next to whatever it modifies. Here's our example. Having arrived late to class, that's our modifier, a written excuse was required by the attendance office. Now we're going to jump into the incorrect and correct examples here so that we can look at this in more detail. But again, our incorrect option here says, having arrived late to class, a written excuse was required by the attendance office. Now the problem here is we have that underlined modifier at the beginning of the sentence. But that underlined modifier doesn't directly refer to anything. And I think it's going to be easiest to see this problem once you see the corrected sentence, and then we'll come back to the incorrect sentence. So here's the corrected version. Having arrived late to class, the student required a written excuse from the attendance office or for the attendance office. Now, in this sentence, we now have someone, the student, that is being described. The student is the one who is arriving late to class. If we look at our incorrect sentence, we say having arrived late to class, but we don't say who arrived late to class. We don't say whom was the person who was a little bit tardy. And because of that, we have a dangling modifier. Our modifier isn't attached to anything in the sentence. If we go back to the corrected version though, we can see that now we have a noun that is being described, the student. The student was late to class. And so now we have corrected the problem. All of that said, your takeaways from today are this. First off, a modifier is a description. Second off, a modifier needs to go right next to whatever it is modifying. When a modifier is in the wrong spot in a sentence, that's called a misplaced modifier. But then when a modifier doesn't describe anything at all in the sentence, when it's not attached to anything in a sentence, that's called a dangling modifier. Now to fix a misplaced modifier, all you need to do is move the modifier right next to whatever it is describing. To fix a dangling modifier, you have to add in the noun or the verb that is being described by that modifier. In this case, what we did is we added the words the student to our sentence in order to make it so that our modifier was accurately paired up with something. Thank you so much for watching today. I really appreciate it.